we're getting to our image container, except this is going all the way through our tunnel without being decrypted. And it's only being terminated at my reverse proxy. So Pangolin is an awesome way to expose your self-hosted applications to the web without exposing your private IP address and opening ports on your own network router. So if you're already familiar with using Cloudflare tunnels, which is super popular, Pangolin is essentially your own Cloudflare tunnel that you can run and have full control of on a virtual private server. Now, my first Pangolin tutorial, I showed you how to get a whole Oracle server set up for free on their free tier and get Pangolin set up. And I showed you a couple of ways how to expose your services with an HTTPS connection, both initially where you just have an HTTPS connection from the client to Pangolin and have Pangolin route directly to your application over HTTP, which is fine, but in a system where you have your own reverse proxy on your network so that you can have HTTPS while you're on your network with your own DNS server, which I've showed you how to do, which is also great for using Tailscale as well. It's actually a lot better to have HTTPS from the client to Pangolin and from Pangolin to your reverse proxy. Now, I did have a couple questions about, is there any way that we can have a full encryption from client through Pangolin all the way to our reverse proxy that is fully encrypted? And that way there is absolutely no theoretical way for someone who has eyes inside of your virtual private server to be able to actually see the traffic that is going through it. And that's a totally valid question. You have sensitive self-hosted information, your image server, whatever media you have streaming on your Jellyfin, you have sensitive documents in your paperless and your Nextcloud, and you don't even want it to be theoretically possible for Oracle to be spying in on your traffic because Pangolin is terminating HTTPS, so it's decrypting the traffic and then re-encrypting it to your server. This video is going to show you exactly how to do that, where we only use Pangolin to forward all of the traffic through the tunnel, and the HTTPS gets terminated only at our reverse proxy. So all of the traffic that we're forwarding is encrypted through the Oracle VPS. Now let's first talk about some downsides to this approach. So the major downside is that we're not taking advantage really of having the reverse proxy in the cloud. We're not taking advantage of having Crowdsec in the cloud, looking over our logs in the cloud and blocking traffic right there. So we're definitely going to have to rely on our own Crowdsec instance, looking at our own reverse proxy on our server. Now, the other drawback to this approach is that you're going to have to use a non-standard port that you're going to be forwarding this TCP traffic. So I'm going to show you how to get all of that set up in this video. If you found this useful, please make sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. So let's get into it. Okay, before we jump into Pangolin, let's just look at a quick diagram here to describe what I talked about in the intro. So in my first Pangolin tutorial, we went over these two methods right here where we terminated HTTPS inside of Pangolin. We have our WireGuard tunnel to our gerbil container, which then talks to our applications directly, or it can talk to our reverse proxy with HTTPS, and then, of course, that proxies to our service. So in this video, I am going to be utilizing my Swag reverse proxy because Nginx Proxy Manager does not support the proxy protocol out of the box. And so when you get to the point where you're having to write custom Nginx blocks inside of Nginx Proxy Manager, it really defeats the whole purpose of Nginx Proxy Manager. And I really would just recommend that you move to Swag, because This is a much more complicated setup anyways, and Swag is just, makes it really easy to set up Crowdsec out of the box, and it's a lot easier to set up this proxy protocol. So definitely, I would go ahead and move to Swag if you're going to use this approach. So that's what it's going to look like. We're going to have fully encrypted traffic, and I'm going to be using port 4433 to do this. So kind of like 443, but then with another 3, and this is all over HTTPS. So what this looks like in Pangolin, the first resource that I created in the last video, which is just my image.thomaswildtech.com, we can see that this is up and running. Refresh the page here, and I have that's going all the way through Pangolin. I'm using a VPN right now because I don't want to use my own DNS server, which has rewrites. So just to make sure we're going through the tunnel, we have that. And then we have the next resource that we'll create, which is just a raw TCP resource, and it's using port 443. So what happens when I go to my URL with port 4433, we're getting to our image container, except this is going all the way through our tunnel without being decrypted, and it's only being terminated at my reverse proxy. So that's what we're trying to set up. Let's go ahead and get it done. So the first thing to do is make sure that your Pangolin is up to date to 1.12.0 at least, because this is the first version, which was only released less than a week ago, that enables the proxy protocol. And this allows you to capture the real client IP on your reverse proxy. So the biggest reason why I haven't done this video before is that even though I've been able to accomplish a fully encrypted tunnel with the Raw TCP resource, I have not been able to get the real client IP because Pangolin didn't support the proxy protocol, at least in the user interface. So now that it does, I am able to get the real client IP, which is very important for being able to have Crowdsec ban actual client IPs and not ban your own durable Docker container IP, which is what you would otherwise get. So make sure that your Pangolin is up to date. You can tell what your version is by just looking at your Pangolin Docker Compose file and looking at the image that it's using. It should have the version out here. So if you're on like version 1.8, 1.9, it is recommended that you go to each minor version change and do a Docker Compose pull. Make sure that you're up and running just fine with version 9, 10, 11, 12. Just get yourself up to date. You can check the latest versions by looking at the Pangolin docs and go to how to update. And it's basically just going to tell you that it's going to say, look at the latest versions. Each of these links will take you to the latest version, and then just update the Docker Compose file to the latest version. Now, in the documentation, you will find how to do this in the resources and then the raw TCP UDP. Okay, make sure you have the flag enabled in the config file. I believe mine was by default. You would know that you're allowed to use raw resources by going to your resources, adding a resource, and then if you have that option to have a raw TCP resource, that's all you're looking for. And then the next part is the port. So we're going to be using a non-standard port to be able to do this, because otherwise port 80 and 443 are being used by Traefik to terminate HTTPS. We need to use a port for our raw traffic. So if I open up my Docker Compose file on the server here, I'm going to go down to your gerbil container and just make sure you map a port that you want to use for this resource. So I'm going to use 4433, like I said before. Save the file. Now, obviously, you also need to open this port or forward it on your VPS provider. So since I'm using the Oracle free tier, I'm going to log into my Oracle account here. And I'm going to go to my compute instances and go to the one that I'm running this Pangolin on. Then let's hop over to the networking tab and then go to the subnet that this instance is using. And then on the subnet, we're going to go to security and then go to the security list for this subnet. And then let's look at the security rules. Okay, and you can see that I already have a resource here for port 4433 with the source port range all. So that's all I need. In order to do that, you would go to add ingress rule. Source CIDR would be 0.000 if I wanted this accessible to anyone and everyone. And then the source port range, just go all. And then the destination port would be 4433. And then you could say that this is for Raw TCP full encryption, and then add that rule. I'm going to go ahead and just hit cancel because I've already done that. And you can see that we have that rule right there. So now we're able to make that connection because we've allowed that port in our VPS provider. The next thing we need to do is actually configure Traefik. So we need to add this section in Traefik to tell it that we're using that port for TCP. So if I hop into my Traefik config.yaml file, you're going to find the entry points. And then you're going to have web secure, and then you're going to have your TCP dash the port you're using, 4433, and then the address, and then we have 4433 TCP. So go ahead and save that file. And then we can go ahead and restart our stack with Docker Compose down and Docker Compose up D. And then the proxy protocol. So we don't really want to use this without the proxy protocol. Like I said before, we would then be unable to get the real client IP. So this is what we want the proxy protocol for, to forward that original client IP address. That way our own CrowdSec can actually make decisions on original client IPs. And yes, the important thing here is that the backend application must be configured to accept the proxy protocol. So we'll do that in our swag Nginx container. But in order to enable this, we do need to add this to our dynamic config right here. So open up your dynamic config. You should have one root here for HTTP. And then what we're doing is adding a TCP here. So we're going to paste that in from the docs there and go ahead and save that. And at this point, you would probably just need to restart Traefik, or you could just restart the container as well. So now we're actually good to go to configure our raw resource here. So before we start configuring our own reverse proxy, our own swag on our server, we can just do this without the proxy protocol and just see if our raw protocol works. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and delete the one that I have here, and then I need to actually type this in. All right. Now our website is no longer going to work. Go ahead and verify that. Nope, not working. And then let's add that raw TCP resource. So I'll call this image full encryption proxy. We're going to use the TCP protocol, and we're going to use that port 4433 that we configured in Traefik and opened on Oracle. And then we're going to add a target. So the first thing we can do is actually just route this directly to our reverse proxy on 443. So without even setting up proxy protocol, let's just go ahead and test this out. All right. This is the local IP address of my swag container. I'm going to go to port 443, and then we're going to create resource. So kind of nice that the web application just right here tries to make sure that you do what we just did. So we already got that set up, but now let's go ahead and go to the resource. Okay, and now you can see we have the enable proxy protocol. So that proxy protocol needs to be set on the port of our target to be able to use that. Okay, So I haven't configured Swag to enable the proxy protocol on my server side. So what this means is that we're not going to get real IPs, but our full encryption should work. So let's try refreshing. It's not working. Let's go ahead and just try restarting Traefik here. Here we go. Okay, so that is working. Now, the main issue is going to be the IP address. Now let's open up my Swag container, and I want to go to my log folder and then Nginx, and then I want to look at the access logs here. Go scroll down to the very bottom, and you can see right here, this is the Docker container IP address for Newt. And I do not want that. So the reason why this is not an acceptable situation is that Crowdsec is going to be looking at these logs, and it's going to be seeing malicious traffic coming from our Newt container. It's going to stop the tunnel altogether from Newt, or worse yet, the Docker network IP is already whitelisted and it's not going to do anything. So we definitely do not want that. So we need to actually configure listening to port 4433 on Swag. So what you should do, and you do need to consider the network mode that you're running Swag in. And at this point, it's not really as ideal to run this in host mode because you don't really want a port exposed that's listening to a proxy protocol because it's going to be susceptible to IP spoofing because we're trusting the sender of the traffic. We really only want that port to be accessible from our Newt container. That being said, I'm already running this in host mode. So, and I don't want this to be a Docker networking tutorial. So because I'm running this in host mode, it's just automatically going to be mapping. Now, if you are running this in bridge mode, then what you're going to want to do is add port 4433. Or if this is in the same network as your Newt container, then you may not even have to do a port binding at all. If you are going to do the port binding, then you should make sure that it is binded to only the local host and not external connections like that. Now I'm running Swag in host mode, so I can just create a server block that is listening to 4433, and that is going to work. So that's what I'm going to do. Again, there are multiple ways you can network this in Docker with your reverse proxy. However you're currently doing it, go ahead and try getting it set up like that. But I, at this point, probably would recommend against using host mode. There are a lot of benefits to using host mode, and it's just an easy way to keep all of your Docker containers segmented on their own networks. Don't even have to be on the same network as your Swag service. You don't need like a proxy network to connect two different networks. Host mode is great in general, but I probably would not expose a port that is listening to the proxy protocol. Okay, so let's open up our actual Nginx config file that we created for my Thomas Wild Tech proxy host. So you can see our image container. This is why I'm able to access image.thomaswildtech.com currently. So what we're going to need to do is also add support for listening to port 4433 with proxy protocol and configuring the real IP address. So to do that, I'm going to paste this following block right here. So what we're doing is we're listening on port 4443 with the proxy protocol. And with that, we're able to use the set real IP from to either the Docker network range, but really this needs to be that Newt container IP as we saw in the logs. And then we can use the real IP header of the proxy protocol. So then we can say if the proxy protocol exists, then set the real client IP to the proxy protocol address. And probably what I would do is just put this in a separate config file. Let's go ahead and just have it all right here. Go ahead and save that. You might want to put the listen at the top, so it's kind of just clear what ports are being listened to. Okay, so if you save this and then you restart Nginx or just reload it, so we can do that with a sudo docker exec call the swag container, and then we're going to run the command nginx s reload. Okay, so that should reload the config, and we're still forwarding the traffic to 443. So we need to change our Pangolin setting here. So if we're going to do the proxy protocol, which we do want to do, then we need to change this to port 4433. That's the port that we want to hit on our swag container or Nginx. And just keep in mind, because I'm running swag in host mode, I can use my local IP address of my server itself. If not, you might need to use the IP address of the Docker container that is running. Or if they're in the same network, you might be able to get away with just putting swag in here. So we're going to enable the proxy protocol, stick with version 1, and you get the warning that the app must be configured to accept proxy protocol connections, which is what we did. So save those settings. And now if we head back over here and refresh, it did not work. Okay, checking my newt logs here, I realized that I am listening on port 4443, and I'm trying to connect on 4433. Oh my. Okay, 4433. Give this a reload. Now we're able to reload. We've got HTTPS. I've got the proxy protocol. And you can see in my access log, we are getting the IP address of the VPN provider that I am using. So we're getting the real IP in our logs. We have full end-to-end encryption. All right, guys, so now you can have full end-to-end encryption through your Pangolin Tunnel. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. I got a little messed up with the typo of using port 4443 as opposed to port 4433. So that was my bad. The only thing I might have wanted to talk about a little bit more is just the fact that I was running this in host mode and exposing that port 4433. If I was going to do this tunnel in production, I'd probably switch my Docker networking and not have my swag container in host mode so that I am not exposing that port, because I'm trusting that that traffic is indeed coming from my newt Docker container. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. All right.